WarsawJS.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be talking about should we do live coding interviews? This is a topic that is like much of a debate for me, and I think for everybody that is in this space, because you might not want to participate in live coding interviews because it's too stressful. But on the other hand, as I've been on the other side of the table as well, it is also really stressful to actually conduct these, because you really have to focus heavily on how the candidate's performing and also not to scare them away from the job you're trying to have them take. So I'd like to firstly maybe say who I am, just for a little bit of a background. I've been a software engineer for a couple of years now, and I work mostly with TypeScript right now. And I've also, as a software engineer, participated in interviews, and I've been interviewer and interviewee. As many of us, I kind of tried to get a job in many different places. And I've been part of the process for my previous employer and my current employer, which is Evolution, a sponsor of today's. Like I've been a part of the process, which was just soft skills questions, hard skill questions, but also part of the processes where we actually do live coding interviews. And I think it's really important to kind of distinguish the two and kind of see the pros and cons of each, because like you might see the answer come up later. Should we do live coding interviews? But I think there is no clear answer. So this kind of spoiling the whole presentation, but
it depends.
yeah, the answer could be it depends. So, well, firstly, why would we want to focus on live coding in general? Why can't we just have people come in and answer a couple of questions? Well, it's a problematic because in like recent times there's a lot of resources online, and like a lot of people are just learning the answers to a lot of questions. Like if you go to any kind of interview where we have no live coding and just asking questions about JavaScript, you'll probably get asked about what is the event loop. You'll probably get asked about like how do promises work. And these kind of questions are okay, but at some point the candidates just learn the answers by heart, and you can actually like dig in and make sure that they actually understand the topic. But even then, they can kind of try to, if they're good like at soft skills questions, they can actually try to convince you otherwise. Yeah, you should just hire me because I'm really good at talking and discussing things. So this way, they kind of talk you over. And what we do in our job, well, it is talking a lot, but we also do coding, and there's a big part of the job as software engineers that involves writing some code. So why not do live coding? So we come into to an interview and you actually have a task in front of you and you have to kind of solve some kind of a problem. And that's how we kind of got into live coding. But quickly thereafter, there was like probably a lot of online discussions that you might have seen, that people are saying, oh, live coding is bad. It's really stressful, especially whiteboard interviews where you come in and you have to do an algorithm on a whiteboard and you're not in front of a computer. Well, this is completely disconnected from what you do on your day-to-day job as a software engineer. So there's a lot of problems with live coding in general right now, especially when we're in the online world. As an interviewer myself, I've had a lot of technical issues, VS Code not working properly for the candidate or for me, and we have to still make them share the screen, which is kind of problematic because you can not always see stuff. So the technical issues aside, you still rely that the candidate that you present the problem with is actually never seen that problem before. So kind of the same thing as with the as with asking questions. They can still know the answer. You give them a fizz-buzz question, if you ever encountered one of those, and they will just write down the answer in a couple of seconds. And you have to still rely that the candidate has like some line of thinking. And in a lot of problems with where you give a candidate a coding task, you kind of rely on a candidate knowing some kind of a quirk or some kind of thing that will click for them so they can answer this. And a lot of times, if given a time frame and kind of a stressful situation where they tell you, oh, you have to solve this task, and after you solve it, maybe we'll give you a job. But if you don't solve it, your chances go really, really down. Then given these stress levels, a lot of times I've seen candidates, and being a candidate myself, you just get too stressed and you're not able to perform to the best of your abilities. So kind of from the both sides, it's a lose-lose situation. So I actually was in one of these interviews where I was a candidate and I was given some tasks, and at the beginning of the interview, I was actually told that there are going to be 3 tasks, which is quite a lot, and it was supposed to be like 2 hours. And the first one I should be able to do. The second one might be a little bit harder, but the third one no candidate has ever done. And after that, I was really wondering, like, what are they trying to achieve? Do they have some kind of problem that they want me to solve and do it for free during an interview? Or are they actually looking for candidates to do the job? Because I'm not going to be solving really hard problems. I'm going to be probably copying and pasting some React components from one place to another. So after this interview, I actually, at the end of it, we had some time for questions, and I actually asked them, what do you want to achieve in the live coding? And they said, yeah, we know it's kind of bad, but this is the best we can do. And they kind of agreed with me that the point of this interview is stupid, but in the end, they ended up rejecting me. So I guess win-win, because they wouldn't accept the offer anyway. So this is kind of like what live coding would look like. You performing on a stage, you're in front of people, and this is not how the day-to-day job looks like. The perfect live coding environment would be when you're pair programming with somebody, and the interviewer is like your partner that you can ask questions to, and they can tell you, yeah, so you can use this library and this. So when we do live coding, we usually let the candidates, or always let the candidates use any kind of Google or anything they would use in their day-to-day job. And it goes okay, because if the candidate is brave enough, they can ask us questions, so not to solve the task for them, but often we can point them in the right direction if they ask the right questions. So this is somewhere in the vicinity of something that could work as an interview in that sense. But then, like, we have this part where we are the interviewers and we are here with the candidates for 2 hours. And as you may encounter, hiring is really hot right now. So there's a lot of open positions, and hiring is also a big bottleneck for a lot of companies. So you got to understand that if you have some engineers, then you have to pay them for like 2 hours to sit in an interview, and then pay them additional hour, or just have them spend an additional hour on evaluating the candidate. And before that, they have to prepare for the interview. They have to maybe go to an interview boot camp. They should screen the CV. Well, screening CVs is usually HR's job, but a lot of things come engineers' way. And in the end, the live coding part of the interview is also costly for the company. So we're still in this situation. So live coding doesn't make sense in general. Like, who would want to do live coding? And then you gotta think. So like, the interviewer is actually there, and they can see like the candidate solving something. And if there is actually good live coding interview, let's imagine that for a second, then actually you might have a situation in which the interviewer might not focus on the candidate solving something or getting to a completion, but it might be around how the candidate behaves when they encounter something that they didn't see before, when they encounter a more difficult problem, when, for some companies, when they have a deadline that is approaching, how do they behave then? And this is an interesting point, because I would say that just like when police pulls you over and they tell you that everything you're gonna say can be used against you, the same goes with live codings, because it's not everything you type, but it's everything you say, everything you don't say as well, that is gonna work for or against you. So live coding is just another way of having an interview where you kind of give a candidate some kind of a glimpse into how the work is going to go. And you see how they react. And you try to make them kind of a little bit uncomfortable, but not to the point where they will not accept your offer. So, so we as interviewers doing live coding interviews, we're actually also having a kind of a big ask from our employers to actually see what the candidate is performing like. And a lot of times after a live coding interview, even if the candidate implemented a perfect solution, or close to perfect, no, there is no perfect solutions. We oftentimes recommend on rejecting the candidate based on a culture fit or the way they kind of behaves. For example, we might test the candidate. How do they react when I suggest them something? Usually suggest something right, something that will pull them in the right direction. And if the candidate, for example, behaves in a way that they don't want my help, or they are kind of dismissive, it's a signal. It's a signal for me as an interviewer that this candidate is maybe a little bit too stubborn. Maybe, hopefully, it's not based on just one question and response, but that this candidate has some soft related things, soft skill related, that we should be on lookout for. So we get a lot of applicants. We do a lot of interviews. This is not the numbers from my employer, but it's just to show that we go for a lot of interviews. And in these interviews, we really want to focus on like getting the best candidates. So live coding gives us a metric. And we screen resumes right now. They're usually automatically screened. And you have to gauge somehow the skill, because it's not the matter of how many keywords you put in your CV. It's the matter how you're going to perform in the job. And sometimes you would employ somebody for like a week and see how they do, but nobody would like to work for free for a week. So there are some problems to that. So there is really like, maybe it's a necessary evil to do live coding, but maybe it is not. We'll get to that. We love KPIs. This is what corporate loves. So you have a key performance indicator. That means you can turn just all of the candidate into a single metric. And we would do that. So we can have some decision about whether we should hire somebody or not. And it is kind of predictable that the way you do live coding is that did the candidate solve the problem or did they not solve the problem? And this way, we can either hire them or not hire them. This is a bad way to do live coding, of course, because it ignores a lot of things that I already mentioned before. But it's always much easier for some kind of like a corporate high-level executive who's making the hiring decisions to see that we have this single metric that will help us determine if the candidate is a good fit or not. And with soft skill related questions that are often elaborate essays in the evaluation from the interviewer, you cannot boil it down to a single number. So it's bad. And live coding, there's a single number, how tests are passing is good. So unfortunately, that's why we often end up with live coding interviews, especially in bigger companies that have the capacity to do it. And this is pain. This is pain for interviewers, but especially for the candidates, because then you have an hour spent in the evening or in the morning where you really stress. And I feel like the same I feel on an oral exam during the studies. So one thing I didn't mention, I study law, and they have a lot of oral exams there. And this is like the most stressful thing. And to me, somebody watching you live code, it's really stressful. Why would we do that? It's just pain. And you need help. And there's a lot of pain. And I hope that there's like something else we could do. Should we do live coding? So we have a solution. We might have a solution. We want to gauge how the candidate behaves given a problem and how do they arrive at a solution. And we want to see their problem-solving skills. And what do we do in programming jobs other than writing code? We do a lot of reading code and reading Stack Overflow, of course, as well. And so we could test people on Googling skills, but that wouldn't get us far. But we could make them read, and then maybe somehow we could gauge how they solve problems. So I don't know why I put this here, but oh yeah, I remember now, sorry. After you read code, you often want to usually find the person who wrote it and do that to them. So be kind of aggressive towards them, because oftentimes you find some legacy code that was written 3 years ago and you don't understand what it is. There's no documentation, and the only comment message there is fixes after code review. And then you find out that the commenter was you, but it was you 3 years ago. And it might sound like a meme, but it actually happened to me several times. And you should watch out for it. So never find somebody, never be mad at somebody that left their code. You always should do the Boy Scout rule, so always leave the code better than you found it. Anyway, back to the reading code part. We read code, so how I imagine we could do it. So we could just think about some alternatives to live coding. We could quiz people, for example, and we can do like, what is the event loop, and quickly answer. What is promises, and you quickly answer. And this way we have some quizzing done, and maybe we can check off that they know this stuff. But that doesn't get us far. And some part that I really like and I really enjoy is having a discussion. So one technique I tried to employ during interviewing was actually not necessarily quizzing people, but asking their opinions. And through opinions, I could kind of understand if they actually worked with some technology and if they understand their technology. Because if somebody says that something is really bad and it should not be used, like take any technology you developed in the last few years, and they just say really a lot of bad things about it, usually that means they don't understand it fully, or they don't understand the application, because usually it means they just haven't encountered a problem that required this specific solution, because usually there is a right tool for the job. And recently I've been asking candidates, like, how do they enjoy TypeScript? Where do they see purpose of TypeScript? And this kind of gives you an idea on how the developer interacts with code, how do they think about developing some features. And you can also talk about like, how did you debug something? How did you go through some kind of a problem or some kind of an alert that popped up? And how did you deal with that? So there's also something that I see could be a future of live coding, sort of. It's code review. So instead of giving our candidates live coding during the process, you would ask them to go through somebody else's code, which is what we do often, and leave comments. And from these comments, you can often gauge on how the developer communicates. Because if there's one single skill that is more important than knowledge of framework, knowledge of language, is the communication skill in a role as a software engineer. And it's really important that you communicate clearly and kind of follow the Berlin Code of Conduct. You are not not dismissive of anybody's ideas, and you're asking more questions than telling somebody that he's outright wrong. So I think there is a big possibility for interviews to kind of change into a code review, where you go through some code and then you ask them to leave comments, then you go through the comments, maybe then you ask the candidate to refactor the code, or maybe not. And then you can see like how the developer thinks. You're not asking them to come up with something. You're asking them to do something that is often the biggest part of somebody's work. Because I don't know about you, but if you're in the software engineering field, you often have these days where you have more code reviews than actual development. There's also a kind of a big possibility of using work samples. So GitHub profiles are actually a thing, and some people are actually using them. And I gotta say, I've been in companies and I've been interviewing where we actually look at your GitHub profile when you provide it. And oftentimes, to decide whether we give homework or not, we we go through some kind of work sample that they have on their GitHub that they provide us. And this way we can kind of see, oh, how did they structure the project? How did they document something that they did in their own free time, or they contributed to some open source? This is, of course, a big limitation to a lot of people that are not kind of the passionate developers that do a lot of work outside of work. And of course, this only works with fraction of our candidates that actually work on their GitHub profile and their open source appearance. But if it works really well, because based on that, we can actually make a lot of assumptions that most of the times are actually true about how a specific candidate works through their code, how they structure things. And it helps us a lot because homework is the biggest factor in our candidates actually rejecting us. So oftentimes this is the biggest bottleneck of people saying, oh yeah, I'm gonna do homework, and 3 weeks later we have radio silence. I don't blame them. Homework is difficult. You have to spend time after hours, and often you're actually not do it to the best of your abilities because it's not during the job. If you do homework during the job, then yeah, that's fine. But you shouldn't be expected to do a lot of work before that they're not even going to use, because we always give the same homework to everybody. And also somebody can do homework for somebody else. So that's a problem. So these are the alternatives I listed. And I think some of them have a really big potential. But in the end, it's a matter of opinion of what should be picked, and it's a matter of match between a candidate and an interviewer on what style should be performed, because some people really perform well in live coding, and some people perform really well in quiz kind of interviews. So it also depends on what you're interviewing for. So we also tell ourselves that the situation of software engineering years is kind of special, and why do we even have this discussion of live coding or not? 1 minute, thank you. And I think the situation stems from that there's a lot of young workforce coming, and a lot of people that are actually starting their jobs without getting a degree first, which is really cool. And it's awesome that the barrier of entry is so low. But it's also ending up with a lot of problems in the interviewing space, kind of, where we had some kind of a format, we had some questions that we asked, but then everybody learned the answers to them. And how do we test them? So the situation is a little bit special, but not quite that, because I think you would find a lot of similar situation happening, a lot of different fields. So let's not think that we're so special. And lastly, kind of, I want to emphasize that I think resumes are not that important, because they're just a paper right now, and they're usually scanned automatically, and oftentimes your format is not working with them. So should we do live coding? It depends.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.
Closing thought is that we're hiring in Evolution. So if you're a JavaScript, TypeScript engineer, please reach out. We're always looking for some great candidates. You might encounter me during an interview.
Is this a plug? This is a basic advertisement.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we ask questions, I want you guys to remember that these microphones are not just for us in the room, but also we have a live stream going. So it's important that your voice be registered by the microphone. So try to hold the microphone as close as possible. Thank you. Now, thanks to Zachary. I know that a live coding interview is basically a psychological evaluation, right? That's what it is. And I'm as skeptical as you might be. I have a question, quick question first. So this idea of actually the code that you're being asked to do actually being a problem that the company or the business has that they want to have solved. Has that ever occurred in your experience?
I don't know, actually. I mean, most of the times live coding interviews I feel are just kind of out of the blue, and they solve some non-existent problems that is supposed to be algorithmic heavy. But in the end, you never know if they're not going to use it. Questions?
Yes, thanks for your presentation. I have three, I hope, quite quick questions. First, okay, so the question is, if person fixes the problem, but behaves, let's say, badly, should you hire him or her or not?
Well, in my experience, I would say that live coding is as much as the hard skills, it is also soft skills. So if they behave badly, I'm not sure how bad behavior would be described in an interview, but I imagine like being maybe a little bit too aggressive or a little bit arrogant. This is something I usually write down as a red flag during an interview, and I do put in my evaluation and then a decision. And yes, I think there is at least a 50-50 priority in terms of the behavior during the live coding and the coding itself.
Hi, maybe I misunderstood, but you said something that during the live interview, you somehow, evaluate candidates numerically and give you some KPIs. Did I get it right, or
yeah? So
if yes, so how do you measure that?
Yeah, so this way I wanted to kind of allude to the corporate law for the KPIs and the funnels. In general, the way I see it is oftentimes we would count, did the candidate solve the problem 1, or did they not solve the problem 0, or this would be a binary classification, not an indicator. But we would also kind of count how far did they get in solving the problem, not what approach they took. So if they solved it like halfway through, they had like half of the problem solved, if that's even measurable in any way, we would put it as a half higher in sort of this way.
Hi, thank you for your insights. And I have a quick question. Do you think in the future, since universities don't provide the screening necessary, do you think some kind of like third party or maybe a startup could solve screening and issues with homework?
As long as people are willing to do the homework, I think there is some market for that, definitely. If you have a startup in mind or you're starting one, then I would be happy to join. But I think the way forward is to make the processes shorter if possible, because sometimes the processes get too long and they also have a lot of difference in length. And you often have like an offer from one company, even though you started in the same on the same evening, you sent all the resumes, and then you have an offer from a company in a week, and the other wants to take 2 months to actually get you to an interview. So this is what we should work on, probably.
Thank you so much, everybody. Give Zachary another big hand. Very